topic today is Leadership Myths Busted. And we have some really creative and fun speakers who are coming back from last year's camp, Mr. and Mrs. James and Alina Wu. So last year when they spoke to us, they shared about their career and about their courtship journey. And they were engaged, not married yet. And this year in January, I got to go and attend their amazing wedding. And congratulations, the newlywed. So James works for Chevron as a financial analyst. Alina works for my former company as a fiber executive, as a sales executive. And James had the education of finance from UT Austin. I know many of you are in Texas, and UT Austin is an excellent school. And Alina graduated from Baylor, also excellent school in communication. So James grew up in College Station, Texas. Alina grew up in Xiamen, and yet she also lived in France and many parts of the United States. And now they're married and they live in Houston. They both serve together in the young adult small group at the Chinese Baptist Church in Houston. And they love baking, ping pong, and they're a very fun family. And they have a very precious dog that they're holding, dog Nina. So let me give the time to James and Alina. Welcome.
Oops. Oh, thank you, Elena, for that introduction. And it was so nice having Elena at the wedding. She's been mentoring me for a couple years since college. I don't think she got to touch on that, but that made that experience all the more special that now we get to serve with the youth as well and share things that Elaine's taught me, things that we've learned in our life now with you all as well. But yeah, I'll let James do a quick introduction as well.
Sure.
Can you share your screen?
Yeah, let me share my screen. There we go. Everyone can see the screen all right?
We're good?
Yeah. All right, perfect. So first off, we're really excited to be able to talk with all of you. I'm really glad to have the opportunity to be able to share and to speak. And yeah, just praying that God will speak through us and that the words we say are a blessing to you all.
So today we're going to talk about 4 leadership myths busted. You know, there's a lot of things about leadership out there. I'm sure you guys have heard 6th grade through college. I'm sure you guys have had a lot of different leaders in your lives, had a lot of different theories on leadership. But today, James and I are just going to cover 4 that really stood out to us, things that we believed in the past, but we learned the truths about over time. We're going to share that experience with you. But before we go into that, I really would like to hear from you guys. Who are some people that you think of when you think of leaders in your life today? Just put it in the chat. It could be maybe like your parents, your teacher, a certain person in your life who was a mentor. I would like to see, who do you think of when you hear the word leader? What are some names that pop in or some people?
Seems like we have a lot of responses already.
Let's see, we have God, my sister, my pastor, parents, my dad, a lot of parents, mom and dad. Somebody said me, Daniel Huang in 8th grade is thinking of himself as a leader. I'm excited to talk with you. We'll definitely go into that later. What does it mean for you to be a leader? Or your brother, teacher, Jesus, parents, God, teacher, my sister from Helen, the pastor. All right, so I feel like we're hearing a lot: God, pastor, parents, teacher. So yeah, these are great responses. Let's see, older siblings, of course. I'm a middle child. We're both middle children. So we both have an older sibling and a younger sibling. So we know what it's like to be on both ends. But I definitely can relate with you, Albert. Yeah, thanks for sharing, guys. So yes, like you guys said, these are all different kinds of leaders that we have in our lives. We'll definitely explore some of these things later and what it means for you guys as well. Kind of, was it Eric was talking about, but what it means for you all to be leaders where you are right now. All right, next slide. So Elaine gave us a fabulous introduction earlier, but we're kind of gonna just go over a little bit more in depth so you guys can get to know who we are. You want to start off?
Sure. So I'll start first. Again, my name is James. Like Elaine had mentioned, I'm a financial analyst at Chevron. I've been at the company for only 4 to 5 years. I'm actually just celebrated my 5th year anniversary recently. And just to put it in context, a lot of my coworkers, the one I work most closely with, he's actually been at Chevron for 15 years. So there's a big experience gap. But later on, I'll go into how, despite that gap, I'm still able to influence and lead in certain ways as well. And went to UT Austin for a degree in finance. I also took some computer science courses as well, so I have a little bit of technical background there. And as well, I also grew up in College Station. My dad actually teaches at A&M, but I went to UT.
In physics.
Yeah, physics. So very smart guy.
Mhm.
And then yeah, currently serving in church. We do co-lead the young adult small group, and we were also recently leading and having discussion groups with the youth, so 6th grade through 12th grade as well. So really good opportunity to grow, to learn, and to just learn how to talk to younger folks. And then lastly, again for hobbies, actually this morning I just played tennis for 30 minutes to an hour as well. So for me,
Yes,
kind of
like every Saturday.
every Saturday I have a group of friends that we all play together. So it's really great community and a fun time for all.
Mhm. And for me as well, we did cover most of it already, but just some things that I would pull out of that. I guess James and I at church, we both started leading young adult small group this past year at a new church that we joined. And we also helped out with the youth and the youth program at the church we go to in Houston, CBC. They have an excellent youth program, but it also we lead discussion groups with the youth. So the ages actually are similar to y'all. They range from about middle school, like 6th, 7th grade, all the way to high school seniors as well. And sometimes college students come in as well. So we're actually pretty familiar with this age range. So that's pretty nice with y'all today. Oops. Okay. And then for hobbies too, I love to bake, read, play with my dog, Nina. I just want to point out that picture at the top. You guys can see the picture with the glasses on my dog. She doesn't actually need glasses. That's fake. But I just thought it was really cute. It looks exactly the same as my niece's glasses, but we pulled this one off of a teddy bear. So since we've been married, James definitely takes really good care of me. You guys can also see in the picture below. This picture was taken in France. We were just in a family reunion. Kind of funny, but we were all riding bikes. There weren't enough bikes. And James, we'll talk about later, but servant leadership that he is, he decided to hold the umbrella for me so I wouldn't be in the sun for too long while we rode the bike. So he takes very good care of me. All right, so let's get into it. Okay.
You want to quit?
So let's talk about where we are leaders right now. So you guys kind of see, where we're pulling some of our experience from. One thing you guys all mentioned, we asked where you see leaders in your life right now. A lot of you guys mentioned your home, your parents, your siblings, and that's so true. Oftentimes when people think of leaders, just the word leader, you may think of your boss, you may think of someone leading a revolution, the president, these are all great leaders for sure. But more often than not, for every single person in this world, the first leader that they often experience is leadership in the home. Their parents, the first leaders they see or are influenced by, or their older siblings or just siblings in general. So right now, James and I definitely see that we are leaders and influences are in our own home in different ways. On the left side of this picture is my family, my 2 sisters, my dad, my mom, my brother-in-law, and my 2 nieces. And then on the right is James's family, his 2 sisters and his parents. And now that we're married, we're actually starting our own family. We've for 6 months, and we're basically creating our own family culture. Though we don't have kids that we're leading just yet, we are also learning to lead each other in our home. Can you talk about that a little?
Yep, sure thing. So leading at home is a very new experience. I think oftentimes now, like even shopping, right, we have to think about each other and not just ourselves. And so really learning to be proactive, to be thoughtful, to take initiative at home is a very important part of leadership. And eventually those skills will also be helpful, whether raising kids or at work as well. So really the opportunities that you get to either experience good leadership or to practice good leadership at home with your parents, with your siblings, is really a great opportunity for you to grow and to mature so that when you go out in the world, go to work, that you have these skills already in your pocket.
Mm-hmm.
And then moving on from home, we are also leaders in our community. As we had mentioned before, we are co-leaders in our young adult small group for CBC. But something we do want to point out as well is that we are co-leaders, right? We're not the leaders. An important part of being a leader is to be able to work together with a team. Because each of us, we have our own strengths, but also our own weaknesses. And so something we've learned as well through leading is that you're finding good people to serve with, to lead with, and then being able to trust them to do their part is an important part of leadership. So it's always a learning experience, learning how to better communicate and to work with others. Mm-hmm. And then lastly, when it comes to work, again, like we had mentioned, we're both fairly new to our careers. And so typically without the title of boss or supervisor, it might be less common to think of us as leaders. But I think as we'll touch upon in some of the upcoming slides, our own personal experiences, despite not being bosses and supervisors, we've had the opportunity to exercise leadership and to practice leadership in our jobs.
And the pictures you see, I don't know, we probably seem old to most of y'all already, but in this picture, we're actually younger than we are here. This picture on the right, James just started his job at Chevron. That was during your internship, right?
Yes, I believe that's my internship. So when I was 21 or so.
Just young 21-year-old James.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, you can see that's me when I first started my job about 3 years ago. So maybe I don't look too different now, but it's been lots changed since then. All right, so kind of talking about work, how maybe we don't have the exact title of manager or boss. You may think, so how are we leaders right now? That's one myth that we really busted. The myth is that you're only a leader when you have the right title. Oftentimes, again, like we said, when people think about leaders, they think I have to wait till I'm a manager or until I'm a boss or until I'm a supervisor or until I'm like a parent before I really am a leader. But the truth that we found is that leadership is really influence. And just a quick note on the truths that we're going to be relaying. A lot of the truths that we find are from the Bible. That's where we get a lot of our worldview and the things that we think about, but also from great leaders around us. And we kind of pull it all together into these slides. So even though, someone may have a title of a boss or someone may have the title of a leader, it doesn't necessarily mean that they actually have the leadership traits or the character or the influence. In reality, leadership is not that title. It's influence and the ability to influence the group. Sometimes you may have experienced this yourself if you're on a group project, or maybe you're in class with the class president. That person may have the title, but they may not necessarily be the one that has the most influence, or the word people often use is sway in the group. So that's one thing to think about as well. Even if you're not technically the boss, technically the manager, technically the principal, it doesn't mean that you can't influence people. One of my favorite quotes is that you can influence up and down no matter your role. Influencing up would mean where you are right now, maybe influencing up towards your manager, influencing up towards your supervisors, or it could even be teachers, depending on where you are. Influencing down, it could be your younger siblings or people that are below you in technical status. Did you want to share an example of that?
Sure. But before we get the example, we did want to read just an important Bible verse from 1 Timothy 4:12 that we believe kind of helps illustrate this point very well. And that verse says, "Don't let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example for the believers in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity." So kind of going along with the bullet point up top, it's not about your age that makes you an effective leader or not. Really, it's about how you behave, your maturity, how you treat others in faith, love, and purity, and so forth. So there's one example that the Bible teaches us on what it means to be a leader. And so from my personal experience, like I'd mentioned before, I've only been at my job for like 5 years or so, and I have coworkers who've had 10 years or even more than 10 years more experience than me. But going along with my small computer science background in college, I have a technical skill in coding that a lot of my coworkers don't have. So we were actually recently tasked with creating a finance dashboard that auto updates every day with automatically updating graphs and tables and so forth. And that's something that I am much more suited for. So even though my coworker, who's been at the company for a lot longer, kind of gave me a broad direction of what we're looking for and what I'm supposed to build, oftentimes when it came to, hey, is this feasible? Is this worth the amount of time and effort? He didn't make that decision for me. Instead, he asked me for my input, my advice on how I felt like it was best to go about building this automated dashboard. And so for me to have such quote unquote little experience in the company, but to be making decisions, to have people older than me with more experience asking me for my opinion, that's just a small example of an opportunity where I got to exercise some leadership, where I was able to influence decisions and influence processes and how things are decided.
Yeah, thanks, James. And an example for me is so right now on my job, I work on a team of about 10 people, and then I have one manager who leads our team. And then above the manager, you have a director, and then, in corporate, and then above the director, you have another director. It just keeps going up until you finally reach the top. But on my little team with my manager, I think this was during my second year, we were having a little bit of a rough time as a team. There were some new team members coming in and out. There were maybe some conflicts on the team. During one of my one-on-ones with my manager, we actually had a pretty candid conversation once, and we talked about something that were going on the team. And during that conversation, because up until this time, I had made it a point to intentionally be a good worker on the team, to be respectful with my manager, to make it a point that my goal is to, help the team and the manager to look good. We had a good relationship and she trusted me and she knew that I was a good worker and that I was on her side. And when we had that candid conversation, it was a result of all of that buildup. I was able to give her actually some pointers or some insight or maybe some candid feedback on ways that she's been leading. And we were able to have, a really honest conversation. And after that conversation, actually something got a little bit better because I was able to influence her, even though I wasn't actually the manager. I was able to exercise leadership in that conversation. I just want to clarify as well, just influencing up doesn't mean that, you disrespect your leader or you disregard what they say. I made it a point up until that time to be a good follower first and to really help her do well and by performing well on my role. And then eventually, as we gained that trust, I was able to influence up as well in my role, even though I wasn't exactly the manager. And I'm still on that team today. And with things that change now and go back and forth, we do still have that open communication relationship where we're able to communicate. And sometimes I still am able to give her feedback as well. All right.
Now, the next myth is that followers are just there to serve the leader. So you can see in the graphic in top left corner, there's one labeled boss and there's one labeled leader. And so as you can see, the one labeled boss, the boss is sitting on the cart and his followers are kind of slaving away, pulling the cart just to get him from point A to point B. And so that's perhaps what we consider a poor example of what it means to be a leader. And you can see that below the boss graphic, the leader graphic, that is an example of what it means to be a healthy, encouraging leader. So here the leader is working alongside those below him or his followers to reach a common goal of moving the cart from point A to point B. So ultimately, it's really a myth that followers are just there to serve the leader. The truth is that being a leader really also means being a servant, right? And this bullet point here kind of sums up very, very nicely. Leadership and leaders are there to guide the group towards a common goal and growth. And so we have two Bible verses as well that kind of illustrate this point very well. The first one's from Matthew 20:26. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. And for the second verse, we pull it from Mark 10:45. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. And so my personal example really has been since getting married, right? Before, when we weren't married, I did everything for myself. I cooked for myself, the dishes for myself, and shopping for myself. But since being married, I kind of realized, the Bible will say, the man is the leader of the house and that he should love his wife, just like how Christ loves the church. And so living it out really takes a lot of patience, a lot of growth. And something I've learned when it comes to being a leader at home is really making sure that Alina and I together get to our goal together. So if our goal is to have a clean house, to have food on the table, or one day to raise children together, it's not about me waiting around for Alina to do certain things. But instead, if I'm going to lead our household, if I'm going to guide us forward, then really I should be shouldering a lot of the burden, doing a lot of work, so that together we can both move forward.
Mm-hmm. And just want to encourage James. He's definitely one person when I think of a servant leader. Just being married with him, he's very quick to, first be the person to serve or first go get the stool for someone or open the door. And I think that oftentimes people think that, to be a leader, you have to be the one that's giving all the directions. But really, there's a lot of different kinds of leadership. And I think especially for all types of leadership, servant leadership, we're there to serve the people that we're following. We're not there to lord our position or our leadership over them. For me as a kid, I think my small example is my personality when I was younger, I was that bossy little girl. I used to think that because being a leader with my personality, I love you do this as a little kid. But as I grew up, matured, and especially even being married to James, just learning more about leadership, seeing that leadership isn't about putting me on the top or making me to tell other people what to do. Real leadership really is, as in the quote, to help guide the group towards a common goal or growth. And like you see in the picture above, that can mean going behind the cart sometimes to push the team forward or doing everything you can to make sure that your team members and the team succeeds.
All right, so myth number 3 is that you have to have the right personality to be a leader. I think this hits me more personally because Alina and I are very opposite. So Alina is very bubbly, very extroverted, easy to talk to, very outgoing. And so I am in some ways the opposite. And so typically when you think of a leader, you think of people who are outgoing, extroverted. They want to go out all the time, meet new people. But that's very much not me. I feel like growing up, I was very introverted and very nerdy in a sense. But I'll talk a bit more about my personal experience after we talk through the slide. And so really the myth again is that you have to have the right personality to be a leader. But the truth is that leadership is not, it's not designated only for a specific type of person. Really, leadership can be practiced and exercised and grown by all of us, really. And so here the bullet point for the truth is that some personality traits may help with being an effective leader in different areas, but everyone ultimately has weaknesses and strengths, and different kinds of leaders are needed in all different places. That's actually why oftentimes when you look at companies, there are teams of leaders working together because they know one person alone can't do the job by themselves. An important part of working on leadership and growing yourself as a leader is to prioritize your character, your skills that either you have or that you can learn and grow, and also your grit with the growth mindset. And so a recommended reading that Alina appreciates very much is a book called Quiet by Susan Cain.
I'll talk about this really fast. So I read this book when I was in high school. So even you middle schoolers, high schoolers, college students, this is definitely something that you can read. Susan Cain, a really cool author, but she did a lot of studies on different kinds of leadership. And her book Quiet essentially talks about the different kinds of leaders that there are. I'm not sure about you guys. We have a range of different personality types, grades, ages, but I'm sure that some of you in this group may be feeling a little bit more introverted by nature and maybe feel like, hey, this leadership talk, how can I be a leader? I'm so introverted. I don't even like talking to people. Maybe some of you feel that way, but this book by Quiet by Susan Cain, she really talks about how some of the introverted people could make the best leaders. Just a quick summary. She talks about how, introverted people, sometimes they're more prone to the introspection or they can be more observant than some of the extroverted people who may be just on the go and externally motivated all the time. So the people that are more introspective, they may connect well with introverted people a lot better in leading them, but they may also notice things that some of the extroverted people don't notice as well. And with leadership, we want to make sure if the goal is to get the group to succeed, we definitely want to get all different perspectives together. So her book really talks about how there are different kinds of leaders, different kinds of personalities that create different leaders for different purposes. So definitely recommend you all to check that book out. It's not a hard read at all, but it definitely was pretty mind-blowing for me in high school thinking about the different kinds of leaders.
Yep. And also the Bible has many examples of leaders as well. And you have the 12 apostles, and then also other individuals in the Bible, such as Moses and David and Abraham. And I think if you read the Bible, you'll come to realize that Moses, David, Abraham, the apostles, they're all very unique individuals. They have different strengths, but they've also struggled in different areas too. But despite their uniqueness and their differences, God used all of them in their own ways to be great leaders, to be inspirations for us. So just let that be an example of how God can use you and how you can grow to be a leader, regardless of your personality type right now.
Exactly. Like sometimes it's tempting to see people in the Bible and think, oh, they were so perfect. Of course, I can't do what they do. They were such a great leader. But if you really dig into the text, let's just point at the story of Moses, when God was speaking to him through the burning bush. If you're familiar with that story. But essentially, when God told him to go lead the Israelites, his first reaction was that, I'm not a talker. I can't do this. I can't do this on myself. And it just shows, Moses was not that natural person, that first person you would think that thought of himself to go be that leader. But God chooses all kinds of people to be leaders. And so it's not really your personality type that makes you a good leader or not.
And so I'll talk a bit about my own personal experience. So growing up, I played tennis. It's a very non-team oriented sport. Played a lot of violin, piano, did my math books, did my reading books. I was pretty quiet, enjoyed watching movies by myself rather than going out with friends. And so I was definitely a lot more introverted, and communication and talking and public speaking was definitely not my strength. But over the years, I've learned to realize, for example, with my workplace example, of how I was able to use my coding skills and knowledge to influence and to lead and to advise people with much more experience than me on what's the best course of action. I think that's an example of how I'm able to use maybe not traditionally thought of as leadership skills, how I'm able to use these skills to be a leader in my workplace and elsewhere as well. But another important thing is to point out that since being married to Alina being such a great communicator as she is, whenever I make a mistake, whenever I say things incorrectly, or whenever I should be speaking up, Alina will call me out and she'll say, "Hey, James, like you could consider doing this way instead, because it'll help you to communicate better with others." And so I think also, despite me not being a natural communicator, I'm willing to listen to Alina, especially in the areas where she's strong, and to take advice from her so I can practice. And so these days, whenever opportunity comes up, whether it's leading meetings, just saying hi to people, to be proactive, these are things that I kind of right now have to force myself to do. But every time I do it, it gets easier. And so even though my personality is not naturally that of a leader in a traditional sense, these are things that I'm growing and learning and working on. And so I also encourage many of y'all who are maybe more introverted or don't find it as comfortable to talk to people, understand that if you just put yourself out there, if you practice, if you look to skilled people for advice, that you too can also grow these parts of your personality as well.
Okay. Thanks, James. And one last thing I wanted to put on this as well is regarding personality trait on the other extreme or other end is sometimes there's people with natural personality traits of leaders. They may be extremely charismatic. They enter a room and everybody listens to them. You guys might know people like that in your class, maybe like the really popular kids that everybody likes. They walk into a room and everybody just wants to talk to them. You know, they're super charismatic, super influential. There's people like that. But, you know, what I really intentionally wrote down character, you know, prioritize character. That's the first thing that I wrote down there under the bullet points, because you may have all the personality traits of a leader. Maybe one of you guys are like that. You may be super extroverted, charismatic, great at bringing people together, influencing them. But character, I think, is one thing that will get people to stay or really, really help with moving the group in the right direction. You know, there's some leaders out there, I'm not going to name names, but we know in history, there's some leaders that did some pretty bad things, you know, brought people in the not so good direction. So I think that, you know, it is important, like James is talking about, to grow those skills, character traits and personality traits, but character itself, you know, what do you value? You know, who are you as a person? You know, where do you derive, like I said, your values or how you motivate or where you're driving the group? Those are really important things to have. And skills as well, that's just things that you tack on top of that. It can be learning how to do a job or a certain function well, learning how to communicate well. Those are things that you add on top of character. And grit, I don't know if you all have heard of this term before, but I heard about it in high school as well by one speaker that came to our class. But it's really that mindset of just continuing to push through even when things get hard. You know, if any of you guys want to grow in leadership, it's not going to be easy. You know, there's going to be different things to overcome for you depending on your strengths and weaknesses and where you're at. But grit is that mindset of perseverance, essentially, you know, and continuing even when the going gets tough. And then lastly, of course, the growth mindset. You know, if you want to be a leader, one of the first things is to really take ownership, you know, knowing that no one can force you to become a leader. Like that's not something that happens. It starts from your desire or willingness or want to grow and become a leader. So those are kind of just a couple of things that I wanted to put out there, things that I've learned from great leaders that have mentored me and things from experiences that I've gone through in my growth as well. So I wanted to make sure we didn't miss anything in the chats. I think we're good.
We're good.
All right. The last myth. Leaders know when to seek help. This is also one of my favorite quotes that I put in here. You can go fast alone, but you go furthest together. Have you guys heard of this quote before? I'm just curious. If you have, like, raise your hand. Give me like a raise hand if you heard it. Okay, some people have heard it. 7th grader heard this quote before. So that's good. You guys are far along for where you are. But this is one of my favorite quotes because oftentimes, you know, when you think that as a leader, sometimes people feel like you have to have it all together. You have to know all the answers. And for this specific example, before I get to example, let me just read through the bullet points. So leaders know when to ask for help and where to get the best advice. They admit that they don't know the answer and they have humility over protecting their face. In Asian culture, especially, there's this concept called face. Maybe you guys have heard of it, where we like to protect our image or the way that people perceive us. So that's kind of what I'm talking about here. The verse that we use in reference to this is trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him. He will direct your paths. This is driving even deeper. So seeking not just other people's help, but for us as Christians, we seek God's advice as well, or first and foremost. The example that I want to bring for this is actually one that I just got yesterday. I had another story prepared, but I had the opportunity to talk with a director at AT&T of one of the really big markets at AT&T. And she, during our interview and talk with her, I was interviewing her for an article that I was writing. But one question that I asked her is, what is one of the biggest pitfalls that you made as a leader that you can share? So this woman, she had her own startup in Silicon Valley, her own firm, and now she's working as a big director at AT&T, very high achieving woman, made it very far in the technological space. And it's her, like, there's very few women in technology. And then even to make it as far as she did, I'm just saying, very impressive. But one thing she said that really stood out to me is she said, check your ego at the door. And she gave me an example. She said, when I first got this job as a director here at AT&T, I thought that I had to have all the answers and I had to know everything about this role. And so I ended up going a lot slower than I could have because I didn't want to ask questions and I was afraid to look like I didn't have all the answers. And she said, if I had just admitted and been humble and admitted that I didn't know everything and asked questions sooner, things would have moved a lot faster and a lot better at the beginning. So this is coming from someone who's made it pretty far in life. And I think that it's just a good example for us all the way where we are, students and just starting out, to realize that even when you make it all the way up there as a leader, you still have to check your ego at the door and ask questions. The best thing to know, like, you only start knowing something when you know you don't know everything. That's another one of my favorite quotes. You know something when you know you don't know everything. So especially where you guys are at right now, don't be afraid to ask questions. Know that there are people out there willing to help. There is a way, of course, to phrase questions, like intelligent questions, or a way to phrase it in a way that you do your own research and you bring it together and have a good question. But definitely don't be afraid to ask. And especially as leaders, sometimes if you like the director was talking about, you want to protect your face, pretend you know everything, but that can actually be worse for the group because you may not lead them in the right direction. So just again, as I mentioned, leaders really need to know when to ask for help and also where to get the best advice. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, so actually I have a pretty interesting personal experience, and it kind of goes along with what I've shared about my personality and communication. But especially in the very beginning, I was just learning and practicing more skills. Oftentimes when it came to writing text to certain people in different tricky situations, I was maybe on the other extreme, where instead of not asking questions, I would go to Alina with no idea, nothing drafted up, haven't thought it through. But, hey, Alina, like, what do I say? And then Alina would get a bit stressed out. She'd be like, why are you like asking me all the time? And then I think over time we talked about it, understanding, why she felt that way and how to go about working together. And something Alina kind of shared with me, which is very important, was that in order for people to know that you care when you ask questions, to come prepared with a couple of drafts or a couple of examples of like, hey, this is what I think I should say. What do you think? So I think as a leader, as someone who's growing, an important part is to be thoughtful about what you don't know and to be able to communicate that you are thoughtful about it. So in this situation, it would be me going up to Lena. Maybe I already have a text saved up on my notes page and asking Lena, hey, like, how's this text read? Does it look good? If so, I'll send it. If not, what edits do you have? So it's balancing the understanding that, hey, I don't know how to communicate in certain situations. So I'm going to ask Lena for help. But at the same time, before I go and ask, I'm going to be prepared. I'm going to show her that I do care about getting this right. And I'm going to give her a couple of examples of what I've thought of. And so for me, that's a great example where, as being a co-leader in a household or a leader in a household, still being able to be humble, understand where I fall short, and then asking for help, because God provides us with community, with friends and family, with a lot of different skills. And it would be unwise of us to not take advantage of those skills and opportunities. Yeah.
Oh, thanks, James.
Mhm.
That was a surprise sharing. All right, so tying it all together, we mentioned that earlier at the very beginning, but ultimately all of these great principles from leadership are derived from one person that lived his life in a way that inspired many good leadership principles. You may know the answer to that, but for us, it's Jesus. When he came onto this earth, he did, like, I think a lot of the leadership principles, you can just see different ways in the way that he lived his life, in the way that he led, and you can really see a lot of these lived out in that way. Oh, I think someone raised his hand. Does someone have a question?
We can address question at the end.
Okay. We'll leave at the end. But yeah, all right. So tie in all together. But do you want to add anything to that?
No, that's good.
All right.
Excellent. And talking about the end.
Oh, real quick. But if you guys do want to learn more, I know I'm not going to assume that all of you guys already know who Jesus is, or maybe you're still figuring it out. But if you have any questions about it, definitely reach out to Elaine or Teacher Ming with any more questions about that. But yes, food for thought and preparation for the future.
Yeah. So before we ended the presentation, we did want to leave some questions for you all to think about, maybe to start brainstorming and thinking through how you can be a leader as well. But so for the first question we had, it was, have you seen or experienced any of these leadership myths before? And if so, when and in what situation? The second question we have is, in what places are you an influencer right now? And many of y'all mentioned, siblings, maybe being a student, or even tutoring someone. And then lastly, after having gone through these 4 leadership myths, what is one way that you can practice and grow your leadership skills over the coming weeks? So we just want to leave these 3 questions with you to think about and to consider as you continue to grow up and seek to be leaders in your own communities.
Yeah, and that's all we have for you guys. Thank you so much
Thanks
for
your
being
time.
here.
Wow, what a inspiring and practical sharing. Thank you, Alina and James. So we have a few minutes for you to ask any questions. So those few questions, food for thought, will be your homework this week. And Teacher Yan will include those in the email. So any question for James and Alina? What a powerful teaching using their example and real truth from the Bible and from what they have learned from other people. Any question, either in the chat or in the turn on your mic?